So it's a pretty well-known fact that orcas are the kings of the ocean. While different ecotypes' diets tend to vary massively, one thing which many different orca pods across the world have in common is their love for hunting sharks. Whether it's orcas eating whale sharks in the Galapagos, or these same killer whales devouring mako sharks off of California's coastline, this phenomenon is shockingly common. Plus, just like any other rivalry, these sharks do fight back. So why do these killer whales go out of their way to prey upon these massive giants? And how do these sharks defend themselves from these amazing apex predators? Well, let's cue the intro and dive straight into it.
Woman caught on camera. Watch this video of an orca taking down a great white shark.
Starting off with one of the most infamous rivalries in the entire ocean, we got the flat-toothed orcas and the world's most iconic apex predator, the great white. While the rivalry between these two apex predators has been going on for centuries, the constant battles between these two apex predators wasn't really that well known until very recently, with the two individual orcas of port and starboard moving right off of the South African coastline with the intention of specifically hunting sharks. Port and starboard actually belong to the flat-toothed ecotype of orca, which is known specifically for specializing in large cartilaginous fish, such as sharks and rays. The flat teeth of this orca ecotype isn't actually a genetic trait. Instead, it's actually a characteristic developed over time as the whales begin to tear into shark's skin, which is made out of denticles, and if you didn't know this, dentin is actually a more durable material than bone. This is why orcas that prey upon sharks tend to have flatter, more worn down teeth overall compared to their more typical ray-finned fish-eating counterparts. By the way, if you're wondering what exactly an orca ecotype is, it's incredibly complicated, but you could almost think of it as its own unique population, similar to what race would be with humans. Not all orca ecotypes actually prey upon sharks, but South Africa's flat-toothed orcas are one of the many exceptions, likely due to the fact that they would have had to have competed with the great white sharks in the past. But as great white sharks are much more agile, sneaky hunters, they likely would have outcompeted the orcas for food. This is potentially what has contributed to the orcas off of South Africa's coastlines developing a taste for shark. Still, their favorite part of the shark isn't their meat, but rather their livers, which are incredibly vitamin rich and also fatty, making it the perfect food source for these orcas. The bigger the shark, the bigger the liver. And since South Africa has a ton of big sharks, these orcas have practically discovered their own buffet, with tiger, great white, and even whale sharks all being on the menu because of their large nutrient-rich livers. Yet that doesn't mean these orcas will go after smaller sharks when larger species aren't available. For example, in South Africa, while great white sharks regularly migrate through the area, seven-gilled sharks by comparison could be found year-round and can often be considered residential, which makes them the perfect target for these orcas, which often use them as practice before they go out to hunt bigger sharks as they get older. These orcas will kill these sharks by flipping them upside down and putting them into tonic immobility. This pretty much puts the sharks in a catatonic state, making them a very easy prey item for these orcas, at least when they're smaller and can be overpowered with relative ease. Bigger sharks are more than capable of defending themselves though, and simply cannot be flipped over the same way a lot of these smaller sharks can. That is why when it comes to a lot of these larger shark species, orcas will typically prefer to work in at least pairs and preferably pods. Even though the average orca is 50% larger than the average great white, that still isn't enough to ensure a safe hunt. Great whites could get up to 20 feet long and have some incredible senses on top of an incredibly strong bite with some razor-sharp teeth. Even though a bull orca is significantly more powerful than a full-grown great whites have an incredible incredibly flexible cartilaginous skeleton, which allows for them to very easily turn around and bite back. Really, it only takes one good bite from a great white shark for an orca to retreat. So how do the orcas deal with this? They simply ram them. By repeatedly ramming any sort of large shark, the orcas are able to stun it with relative ease. And once the shark is stunned, they could simply be flipped over and dispatched properly, with the whales usually dissecting the sharks so they could get the liver, and then sometimes, depending on the situation, eating the rest of the shark afterwards. This is all possible thanks to the orca's massive size and power, in addition to their incredibly high IQs. But that doesn't mean the sharks are lacking in intelligence. It's actually the opposite. While you could argue orcas are the second most intelligent animals on the planet, that doesn't mean these sharks are stupid. They've actually learned how to avoid these orcas through one very simple method. When a large shark becomes incredibly stressed or severely harmed, they will often release a stress hormone and in some cases their own blood, which other sharks could detect from miles away. When such scents from a large shark are emitted, it's a pretty safe bet to say that the shark was likely either caught by a fishing boat or attacked by an orca, and because of this, many different sharks across the world have learned that when they detect such scents, the safest thing to do is evacuate the area. And this has been learned across the world by all sorts of different shark species, ranging from smaller sharks to even the biggest of the big. When such events become the regular, sharks will even end up changing their migration patterns in order to avoid these orcas. This is why great white sharks are so few and far between off of South Africa's coast now. As stated before though, it's not just the flat-toothed orcas that end up hunting sharks. Transient orcas do it as well on the occasion. Similar to great whites, transient orcas are known for traveling hundreds of miles on end just in the search for food, and even though transient orcas primarily prey upon large mammals, they will also prey on sharks as well. But before I talk more about that, if you're enjoying this video so far, then please feel free to like and subscribe. YouTube is my main source of income, and any bit of support helps. Speaking of support, one thing which transient orcas don't get much of is help from lots of other orcas, as transient orcas try to form incredibly small pods in order to maximize their stealth when hunting larger prey. Whether it's whales, seals, other dolphins, or even these sharks, transient orcas need stealth in order to hunt their preferred food items. So while they prefer to be a little more sneaky, just like the flat-toothed orcas, they will gladly hunt these sharks. Not just are their livers a nutritious food item, but by hunting these sharks they're also removing competition for food, as some of the other sharks in the area will also feed on many of the same fish, dolphins, and pinnipeds as these orcas are. In the Pacific Northeast in particular, the transient orcas are known for preying upon mako sharks, salmon sharks, and also, just like the flat-toothed orcas, great whites. This is in huge contrast to most of the resident orcas found in the Pacific, which primarily prefer to feed on almost exclusively smaller fish. Even though these orca ecotypes fill completely different niches in their respective ecosystems, their ranges still do overlap on the occasion, and while interactions are rare, they're not always peaceful. But that's a whole video for another day. So this raises the question, how have these sharks been learning to defend themselves against these transient orcas? Well, most of them simply haven't, and try their absolute best to avoid these incredibly stealthy, deadly pods. But one species, the salmon sharks, have learned to actually stay closer to the coast and sometimes even in the inside passage in order to avoid these transient orcas during the summertime when they are at their most abundant, since they are primarily hunting the larger whales in the northeast as they migrate to feed. Still, they aren't the only orca ecotype in the northeast that preys upon sharks. There's also the offshore ecotype of orcas, which are much less common, but are known for forming pods of up to 30 to 60 individuals, and on top of them taking out the largest of the large when it comes to whales, they will also occasionally even prey upon great whites. Thankfully though, for many of the sharks in the Pacific, the offshore ecotype of orca is incredibly rare. And now that I've said the term orca 1,000 times, I bet a lot of you are probably wondering, do these sharks ever make it out alive from these attacks? Believe it or not, despite the orca's massive size and intelligence advantage, it's actually somewhat common for sharks to be able to escape these orcas alive. Mainly smaller ones which are capable of outmaneuvering the orcas on a somewhat regular basis. Still, even larger sharks have been reported surviving attacks from not one but multiple orcas at once. Going back to port and starboard, the two orcas living off of South Africa's coast, there's actually been multiple great whites recorded in that area which share scars resembling the bite marks of those two orcas. Yet again, sadly for a lot of these sharks, they do end up dying shortly after their attacks due to the injuries sustained during these battles. Really, it only takes one removal of a pectoral fin or one really good incision in the stomach to properly end a shark's life. Unfortunately for a lot of these sharks, the orcas know this, and that is how they're able to take out sharks as small as blacktips, and even creatures as large as whale sharks, and even larger species of marine mammal. Killer whales are incredibly smart hunters, and they know exactly how to weaken their prey in order to dispatch of them properly. A great example of this is how the killer whales in the Galapagos have learned exactly how to tire out the large whale sharks that inhabit the area before attempting to consume them. Even though whale sharks are not a predatory species, they could still get up to 12 tons and over 40 feet long, making them even larger than the orcas and even more powerful. That is why when hunting these giants, the orcas of the Galapagos Islands have devised a new strategy in order to take these massive creatures down. They will actually use a mob mentality trying to tire down the whale sharks, very similar to what they do with larger true whale species. Except it doesn't end with the orcas trying to drown the shark, but instead the orcas, similar to what they do with tiger sharks and great whites, will put the whale shark into a state of tonic immobility once it is tired out. By putting the whale shark into this state, the orcas have the perfect opportunity to not just harvest the liver, but also any sort of other leftover scraps which they wish to share with the rest of the pod. Funnily enough, despite this surgical precision style of hunting being the main reason why these orcas go after these sharks, it's also one of the only reasons why you'll ever see sharks and orcas peacefully together. Killer whales don't just hunt sharks with surgical precision, but as their names suggest, they're also known for doing something very similar to a lot of baleen whale species. To be more specific, some transient pods are known for going out of their way to kill large baleen whales just so they could feed upon their tongues. This, while not so good for the whales, is actually great for a lot of smaller shark species, as when this does end up killing the whale, it leaves a lot of meat left over for all sorts of sharks to scavenge upon. That is why in a lot of cases when these orca pods make their kills, there will usually be some sharks waiting not too far behind, and in some cases you'll even get some people filming videos of them swimming side by side relatively peacefully amongst each other. Overall, just like any other rivalry in nature, the relationship between sharks and orcas is incredibly complicated. And in a way, that is why it's also so very interesting. By the way, I try to make animal mini documentaries every single week, and if this video gets enough likes, I might do another video on the relationship between sharks and many other smaller dolphin species. But before I make that, this video has to do really well, so please like, subscribe, do the weird little hype thingy, and hopefully I'll see you real soon. Goodbye.